Welcome back to another episode of FOMO Fans. My name is Brian Fanzo. As you heard in the intro from my good friend Vincenzo Landino, I am here to cure your fear of missing out. And today we are talking the keynote speaker life. I am a full-time professional keynote speaker. It is not something that I set out to be when I was a little kid. I did not say, Daddy, when I grow up, one day I want to get paid to talk on big stages and have people excited to hear me mouth off for hours at a time. No, that was not on my agenda. That was not something I sought out to become. But I will say that it is my favorite place in the world. It is where I am the most zen. It is my favorite part of what I do for a living. I love creating this podcast. I love live video. I love working with clients to build strategy. But ultimately stepping on that stage as a speaker and sharing and translating what I know, hopefully to giving the audience value and takeaways is something that it truly is my calling. It's something that I am extremely passionate about. But how do you get there? How do you become a speaker? What are some of the things that I wish I did differently? And then ultimately what I think is broken and what I think is kind of ridiculous in the industry as a whole and how we fix it, including getting more diversity on stage, as well as getting additional recognition, also changing kind of what success as a speaker or as an event looks like. And so I'm excited. I'm, of course, broadcasting this live on Facebook Live, on Periscope, as well as on YouTube. And this podcast is sponsored by 9 Spokes. You'll see the logo here, 9 Spokes. So if you go to 9spokes.fomofans.live, you can actually join for free and sign up for their smart AI dashboard. And their dashboard allows you as a small business owner, as an entrepreneur, to pull all of the data that you need into one dashboard. It's a really cool tool. It allows you to bring in some of your marketing, some of your finance, some of your social media, and bring all of that data into an easy, consumable, deliverable of a dashboard. And there's lots of apps that it allows you to connect to. The tool originally rolled out in the UK and overseas, and now they're making a breakthrough here in the United States. And I couldn't be more excited that they came on board for a couple months as my sponsor of this show. And I couldn't be doing this show if it wasn't for the sponsor. So if you love this show, make sure you check it out. Go sign up, hit the join for free button. It takes literally 30 seconds to join and another couple minutes to set up your apps. And then you're off and running into the world of interactive and easy dashboard for you to consume your data. So let's get into episode 39. And this is something that is a important topic for me. I'm truly blessed. My mom always says that when I came out of the womb talking. Because I talk fast. I love to talk. I've always loved to talk. If you ask my high school teachers and my college teachers, they'll probably say 2 things about me. Brian always came in happy, but we aren't sure if he ever really did the work in class. And man, he sure did love to talk. And I, at some point, had my desk moved into the hallway. Almost every year in high school, one of my teachers would put my desk in the hallway because they figured out no matter who they sat me next to, I would find a reason and a why to talk to them. Therefore, the only way they could get me to stop talking and shut up was to stick me in the hallway. And at the time, I thought it was ridiculous. Now looking back, I have 3 daughters. My oldest daughter talks as fast as I do, as much as I do. And sometimes I truly think about putting her in the hallway. So I now can sympathize with my mom and my dad, as well as all of my amazing teachers out there who I will say thank you, and I apologize for any pain my big mouth caused you as a mouthy talk. And I was never mouthy talking back. I just like to talk. And so for me, this is an interesting topic as a speaker because there's lots of great books out there. There's also lots of great online courses right now about how to become a speaker. There seems to be a topic that is growing. But I also believe this industry is one of the oddest industries because there is no direct blueprint. You don't go to college and just get a communications degree and that makes you a keynote speaker. It also, it doesn't there's not only no direct path to success, but what success looks like, how to get booked as a speaker, how do you get your start, how do you move from speaking for free to speaking for paid, or if you don't care, if you're not trying to get paid for speaking, how do you go from speaking at your local meetup to a large event to the biggest event in your industry? And here's the thing, I don't have all those answers. So if you're looking for all of those answers, anybody who says they have all those answers, and I have some emails in my email box right now from some of these very spammy speaker know-it-alls, they're full of crap. No one knows all these answers. There isn't any quick fix, but I'm going to tell you what worked for me, what I wish I learned differently, what I've learned from other people, from friends, and from people that have done it differently than I have. And my goal for this is just to share my journey, share a little bit of the ups and downs. And really, one of the things I want you guys to learn is if you can take what I've done and fit it to how you're doing your work, your life, and then also learn from my mistakes, maybe you'll help push the industry forward one step. And then if we all push the industry forward one step, it'll be beneficial for all. And so, what is a keynote speaker? The idea of giving a keynote versus giving a presentation versus giving a team rally speech. There's lots of people that argue about semantics, but if you've learned anything about me, people that argue about semantics are people that don't have enough information or context or value to add about a big picture. Therefore, they focus on small things like the word keynote versus presentation versus delivery of a speech. And I don't care about that stuff. I want to talk more about how do you kind of establish yourself as someone that is good on stage, that provides value to the audience, that has event professionals wanting you to be hired. And I've had a weird journey into speaking, and I've actually started my speaking career 3 different times because I was a speaker for the Department of Defense in cybersecurity, and then I was a speaker for a data center company as the face of that company in the data center industry, and then I decided to pivot on and go on my own in the social media, social business industry, and when I did so, nobody even wanted to put me on the side stage. So I have 3 different experiences myself on how I kind of found success. And I think it's extremely important to remember there are people that get paid to speak on stage. There are people that have their brand or the company they work for sponsor an event, which then gets them a spot to speak on stage. And then there's also people that speak for different companies and brands, either as a consultant or as someone that is teaching things, that are getting brought in because of a client relationship or because of the work they've already done with that brand. And for each one of those, it is extremely different, right? And I see my good friend Carlos Gil just jumped in here in the live stream as well. And Carlos and I talk about this a lot. Carlos is someone that works for a large enterprise software company that also does speaking around the world. And his journey, how he provides value, the value that his brand and the events get out of bringing him to an event is different than me as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, where that's my main source of income. But it doesn't mean one way is right or one way is wrong. It just means that we have to understand each individual journey. And so when I was, it was 2005, and I had one of the leads of the Department of Defense come to me and say, Brian, you're the only non-gray-haired person in cybersecurity that we believe could present to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and be someone that could be the face of this conversation. So we're going to send you to training, and then we want you to present to generals and the highest ranking government officials every quarter on what's changed, how we need to change our products, and really just like the results and value of our business. And for me, this was like an awesome opportunity. I was like, hell yes, let's do it. And I went to a 5-day training course. A lot of that course was actually on PowerPoint. It was on not using your hands when you talk. It was about slowing down when you talk. It was about where to stand on stage. And remember, this was 2005, 2006 timeframe. So a lot has changed since then because let's face it, those little things, if you master those little things, it doesn't mean that you are a great speaker. Those are little things that help you become a better speaker. But I remember leaving that training being like, wow, I can do this stuff. This is easy. And I got to brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff, every quarter for 4 years. And I got to, present in front of General Petraeus. I got to speak on cybersecurity, talk about change. I was the very first person to speak without wearing a tie at that location, because it was you had to wear a suit jacket and a tie. And I believe, because I was one that was talking about change and the younger generations, that I had to at least deliver some sort of change. And so for me, it was great. It was an amazing opportunity. I had lots of slides, lots of content. The feedback was always amazing. One thing I do regret was that I never really documented or realized how awesome that opportunity was. All that I realized was that, that this was part of my job, and I did this part really well. So much so that when I left the government space and I went to work in the data center company and I went to, as a technology evangelist, I didn't even really highlight that experience of being on stage presenting, because as a manager and as someone that was part of my job was to relay the business value to the business decision makers, I just felt as though that was just an extenuating element of what I had to do for my job. And I'm going to tell you why I regret that in a little bit, so you guys will understand that part of the piece. And I did not wear a backwards hat when I was on stage at the Pentagon. I did not wear my crazy Chuck Taylor colorful Converse shoes. That came later on down the road. But when I started in the data center industry, so that was the first time, was the DoD. The second time was, I started in the data center company, and I became the face of the company. I was the face of the brand. When you went to the website, when you read content, my job was really as an evangelist to help connect the consumers, the actual users of our product and our partners, share the information that our product team was working on, our marketing team was working on, and really kind of bridge the gap between internal and external. And because of that, I was afforded the opportunity to speak at some amazing technology events like Gartner, like AWS from Amazon, like VMworld. I got to present at one of the opening spots of VMworld in 2013, and I believe Steve Wozniak from Apple was one of the closing presenters. And for me, it was an interesting world because I didn't have to go out and get any of those speaking gigs. My company either sponsored the event, or one of our partners was sponsoring the event, and they would come to us and say, hey, do you have anybody that can talk about data center transformation or the future of cloud computing? And if we had that, that was presented to us, we would show up at the event. We would have, the slides that I would present would be reviewed by our communications team and our PR team, and I would go up there and deliver the content that I was supposed to deliver, and that's even where my nickname or the logo, the label that I've got, Talk Fast, Tweet Faster, actually came from a Gartner event that I was speaking at. But one of the interesting things was I loved what I was doing. I knew that it was unique, and I was very lucky to have that opportunity. But one of the things that I did not realize at the time was that I should have been documenting. I should have been recording video. I should have been getting testimonials. I should have really been documenting that entire experience, because although the brands were getting me all of the gigs, I didn't realize that, I probably need to kind of have something about this experience to be able to share in the future, which is a very interesting spot, because when I left the data center space and I was focusing on the social media and the social business space, and I went out there and I reached out to the different vendors and I reached out to different event professionals, and I said, I've spoke at this event. I've been speaking since 2006. This is the topic I think I could speak at your event. A majority of them said, who are you? What gives you the authority to speak about these topics? And I don't even have room for you on a side stage. Maybe you should come to our event as a attendee and learn some stuff, and then work your way up to becoming a speaker. And I can tell you, it was a very humbling experience. It was a very eye-opening experience for me, because at first I was bitter. I will tell you, the truth was, I was like, screw these guys. They don't know how good I am. They don't know what they're missing out of. And then I had to put myself in check and remember, well, it's not their job to know why I'm going to provide value, to know my backstory, to know my background. That's my job. And it's my fault for not putting that out there, for not presenting that, for not having that portfolio, those testimonials lined up so that I could pivot and jump into that space. And I can tell you, it took about a year of building relationships, starting to tell my story in 2013 before I even started to establish myself in a new industry and a new space. And then starting in 2014 is when I started kind of taking things forward. But I want to talk about that spot and that journey for those that are listening here, because I think a lot of people are, get to this arena or this spot where they say, Brian, I'm not a thought leader. I don't know everything, but people are asking me to speak. Or, Brian, I want to become a speaker, but I don't consider myself a thought leader. And here's my thoughts on that. And I hope you guys, take these notes down if you're driving. Don't take notes while you're driving. Just go back and listen to the podcast episode later on. But one of the things I want you to realize is that you don't have to know everything, because nobody knows everything. And people aren't hiring you to know everything because they know that's impossible. What they want to know is that the things that you are doing, are you able to convey that message and teach others based on what you've done and what you believe can be accomplished, right? It's an idea of saying you don't have to know everything, but you have to know what you did, why you did it, how you did it, and then how to relate that to your audience. Because I think this is a major misconception. Just because your company was, you ran, let's say you worked for BuzzFeed and you're like, hey, I left BuzzFeed, I'm working on my own now, and I don't know why people don't hire me because, I worked for BuzzFeed. Well, that's great. But what was your role at BuzzFeed? How did you help them provide value? And then ultimately, how can you convey what you did at BuzzFeed so that other people can learn from it, right? That's your job. And part of this, it's an interesting world, because if someone would have labeled me an inspirational speaker or a motivational speaker 3 years ago, I would have said, please don't do that. I'm not fluffy. I don't sell unicorns and rainbows. I'm not telling people rah, rah, rah. Well, kind of I am. And I didn't realize at the time that there's different elements of inspiration. There's different elements of motivation. And there's different elements of what you can provide as a speaker. But also when you're taking a step back, there's also this element of, what are you doing as a speaker? What is your goal? Because if you're working for a company, if you're full-time salary, if you're getting salary paid for your company, and your company says, we want you to go out and speak at events, okay, you as an individual have to realize, okay, how do I make sure that me speaking at the events provides value to my business that is paying me this full-time salary, right? And then the second part of this is, how do I provide value to the audience as well as the event organizers so that they hire me back again, but also so that I'm not just a sales, marketing, talking head, nonsense person that is just shilling my brand on stage. Because we've all heard those people, right? As soon as that person gets up there and says, I worked for Blockbuster, and we're going to talk about the Blockbuster journey, and really all they do is pitch you and sell you on the Blockbuster streaming service and why it's better than Netflix. And there's an element of establishing thought leadership and association with the brand that's hiring you. But then there's also, how do I convey this in total message? And so there's something that I've learned in my journey that I think this is something that I really want to push forward. If I had to give one goal for every speaker and every event organizer as we move forward, is I want us to think about the relationship between a speaker hired to come to an event, either hired, paid for the speaker's time, paid for the flights and hotel, whatever that journey is. I want it to be considered a partnership, not a one-off consultation or a one-off freelance hire. And the reason I think there's a big difference between a partnership and there's someone that is hiring you as a speaker and it's a one-off thing is, I remember sitting in a couple of events as a attendee, and I was super excited. And let's face it, a lot of people go to events only because there's 2 or 3 speakers that they really want to see that are on stage, right? And I remember going and seeing Simon Sinek the first time on stage. And I was a big Simon Sinek fan. I had read his books at the time. And I was so excited. I got the front row seat. I'm sitting there in Phoenix, Arizona. I get to watch him give his entire presentation, which was mind-blowingly awesome. He went and stood off the side of stage, took some selfies with people. He went and sat behind the table for his book interviews. And then I went up and talked to the coordinator of the event because they were a friend of mine. And I was like, oh, what else is Simon doing here at the event? They're like, oh, no, he's on a flight in about 20 minutes. He's out of here. And I remember thinking to myself that if I ever became a paid speaker, if I ever became someone that was inspiring people to spend their hard-earned money and come to something, that I would not be the fly-in, fly-out person. I would not treat this as I'm only getting paid for what I do on stage. And I know that's different than a lot of people, because a lot of people are saying, I'm paid for that 1 hour I'm on stage. I'm not paid to do things before or after. And to each their own. But I believe the reason that we listen to people, the reason we're inspired by people, is not only the knowledge they provide, not only the way that they deliver that knowledge, but also the relatability that we have with that person and the trust that we have with them as our customer and client. Do we want someone speaking at our event because they have a big name and they've spoken at all of these large events, but nobody in our audience trusts them, or nobody in our audience understands what they're about, or they don't even know what our audience is? I mean, nothing worse to me than someone getting on stage and giving examples in their keynote that are not relatable to the audience or the industry that's in the audience. And that happens on a daily basis, right? And so I love, the speaker industry as a whole. I think it's such a unique, environment. And I've been very blessed to be part of a group of speakers that are really trying to push the envelope, but also sharing different things. And it's a Facebook group of different speakers across different industries. Without question, the most I've ever learned in any group on Facebook is this one speaking group that I'm a part of, and it has some of the most inspirational speakers I've ever been a part of. And I love the diversity of people. I love the diversity of approaches of what people bring to events. And for me, this is kind of, how do you establish credibility? How do you provide value on stage? And then there's one thing that I do with every event that I work with, and it's with every company. And I actually see a couple of the event organizers that have hired me recently here watching on the live stream. And I always ask a couple questions. I always say, okay, you want me to speak at your event. What does success look like for you? What do you look at? When you're looking at success of this event? Is it tickets sold? Is it how many people are talking about it online? Is it digital tickets sold? Is it, hey, this is the first event and we're trying to just establish credibility and we want to make sure that we lead people to the second event? And I always ask that question because I want to be able to help make that event look good. My dad told me very early on in my career, son, you want to know a way to always do good in your job and to get recognized and really give yourself some credibility and some insurances? Do whatever you can to make your boss look good first. Do whatever you can to make your boss look good, because if you are making your boss look good, then in turn, you become a valuable asset to them. And for me, as a speaker, if I am able to make the event organizer look good, if I am able to make the event sponsors look good, if I, as the speaker, am able to, as a whole, be a part of that event and their success is my success, then ultimately, not only is this going to work in both of our favors, but I believe that's the reason I get hired back to the same event multiple times. And so this is one of those things that as we look at the speaker journey, and I explained that, it's so different, right? Like, how do you become a speaker? Some people have written books and become speakers. Some people were CEOs of companies. Some people were celebrities. Some people just decided early on that they were really good at, delivering different kinds of content and conversations and stories from stage to audiences that are out there. There's so many different ways to become a speaker. But I also look at things and say, there's also different ways to continue this journey. And there's different ways on how you provide that value and how you become part of that community. And for me, this is really where I look at things moving forward. And I want to share some of the things that I learned that I wish I did differently so that you guys, the community, can learn from that. And one of them, I talk a lot about screenshot awesomeness, which means document all of your wins along the way. Take a screenshot every time you get some good news. Well, I told you I presented, in 2005 to 2009 at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I then, from 2013 to 2015 or so, I was presenting at all of these technology events. One of the things I did really badly was I didn't document what events I spoke at. I didn't document the feedback I got from my community. I didn't even take video of the speeches that I was giving. Now, granted, it was a little bit different times back then. Like we didn't have, a 10K or a 1080p video camera on our phones. I don't even know if we had cameras on our phones in 2005 and 2006. But for me, I missed out on an opportunity to document some of my success, document some of my wins to add to that portfolio along my way. So that's one of the things I think I made a big mistake on. Another thing was really understanding what my goal was at each presentation that I give, right? Because, early on, I definitely recommend to take any opportunity you possibly can to speak. And I used to look at it, and as I was growing as a speaker and becoming a paid speaker, one of the things that I evaluated as value was how much money I made. Right? Okay, hey, this event's paying me $1,500. The next event's paying me $5,000, right? But here's the weird part. If you truly provide a partnership with that brand and that event, the money isn't the factor. You want that, you're going to deliver the same quality on stage no matter what, because I can't turn it off. It's not like I'm going to present a 1/3 as great keynote to teach them a lesson for only paying me $1,500. That doesn't even exist. Like that's not even a possibility. But what I started to realize was when you start measuring the total value of a opportunity, the value goes way beyond dollars. The value could also be, and this is what happened for me, what other speakers are speaking at the event, the association with other speakers, which might help me raise my speaking profile. What access do I have to those other speakers? Maybe I'm going to get a half hour with Joey Coleman or an hour sitting backstage with Marcus Sheridan or Simon Sinek or maybe I'm going to be on the same stage as Steve Wozniak. Okay, that's value that ultimately can help your business as a whole. There's other places for value as well. Okay, what if this company has multiple events in a year? Or maybe this event organizer is someone that is a freelancer that works for multiple events. And if I go there and do a free presentation and knock it out of the park, this event organizer is going to hire me for my full speaking fee at all of these future events, right? It's about projected value as well as value that you can bring out. And I can tell you, for me, a lot of the events that I wanted to speak at, they weren't willing to pay me what I wanted to get paid. And one of my favorite negotiating tactics was simply, well, could I get an hour with your half hour with your VP, or can I sit down with the CEO of your company and have him, give him a Q&A and some access to them? And of course, they're like, wait a second. You're not negotiating for more money. You're negotiating for time with one of our executives? Sure, of course. Like, we can do that. That's not costing me anything out of my budget. But the funny part about that is, yes, I deliver a great presentation on stage. Yes, the audience gives me great feedback. But I get exclusive time to provide expertise level insights to that executive who's the final decision maker, but I also get them to put a face to the name. I also allow them to better understand who I am. I also get time for them to understand, hey, yes, you hired me for this presentation, but did you know you could sponsor my podcast? Did you know I also get paid to create content for your brand, right? And these are all things that ultimately, when I started looking back, is I missed a lot of opportunities. I should have been better at understanding all of the projected value of different opportunities, right? And so I really hope that when you're looking at different things, because the only way that you're going to get noticed, the only way that I got noticed was because I started getting on more stages and I started putting out more content and videos of me on stage. But I also got testimonials from people in the audience. One of my things that I love to do is that if someone comes up to me after an event and they say, Brian, man, you were a really good speaker. You're my favorite speakers. I'm like, here, would you mind take my phone, hit the video button, and would you mind sharing that on video so that I can put it up on my webpage, or I could make it part of my media kit, right? Because yes, there's this element of defining what you're great at, but you also have to tell your own story and so that people understand it. And one of the things that I pride myself on is that when people say, Brian, you're the same person offline as you are online, that warms my heart. It's my favorite thing I hear. But another thing as a speaker that I take pride in is a lot of events hire me for back-to-back events, which is not the tradition, right? The tradition used to be, we hire you this year, we want to have some new blood next year, and then ultimately, hopefully, we'll hire you 3 years from now because we can kind of recycle things around. And for me, that's perfectly, there's plenty of speakers that take that approach. There's plenty of speakers that treat it like, hey, I'm getting paid for that 1 hour on stage, and the rest of the time I want to be spending with my family or with my business, and I'm not going to give them anything extra. But for me, I know that once someone hears me on stage, they're going to ask me my favorite question, Brian, how do I get more access to your community, or what more can I hire you to do for my company? And I love being able to provide enough value to be a part of the community enough so that people say, you know what, Brian, we're going to hire you again next year. We're not even sure what presentation that you give will be what we want you to give, but we know that our community trusts you. Our sponsors love you. And these are things that we really value, and we want to hire you again. And to me, it's an amazing feeling, but it's not the norm, right? It's not something that has always been the way. And so I think it's just an interesting path to not only becoming a speaker, but just kind of this whole thing, because the hardest part about this world is that there is no right answer. There's no just one way to do it. There's no, hey, I got this speaking gig because my next door neighbor happens to work for the company. Hey, I got this speaking gig because the lady sitting next to me on the airplane happened to be the person that was hiring the speakers for the event. Or, hey, this person happened to hire this speaking bureau and I must be associated with that speaking bureau. There's all of these different things. But one of the things that I, kind of pride myself on is, how do I provide value above and beyond so that people not only realize what I did on stage was of value, but that this relationship has more to add as we go forward. And then I want to share a couple of things that I think are lessons learned as well, right? So this is something, key takeaway for my next pitch. I agree. Definitely, projected value. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot on is I reverse engineer every paid speaking gig that I get. And let me explain what that means. So if someone emails me and says, and I got an email last week, right? They came back to me and said, hey, Brian, we got recommended for you to speak about millennials. We want to hire you to speak at our event that's coming up this November. And this is how much our budget is. And we really would love you to speak. And we've heard great things about you. And so I went there and we did our negotiation, and I asked them, like, well, who did you hear from and how did you come to know who I was? And one of them said, well, we didn't really ever have heard of you, but one of the speakers that we hired recently said that we have to listen to your podcast. So we started listening to your podcast, and we realized that the content you provide and the way you provide the content is perfect for our audience. And I'm like, ooh, that's amazing. And so then when I go back and look at my podcast, I reverse engineer and say, no, I'm not getting paid for my podcast. Well, I'm getting paid by my sponsor right now, 9 Spokes. But when I look at the value of creating free content, all of a sudden, the value of that free podcast now can be linked to getting me a speaking gig at $10,000 or $15,000. Well, now all of a sudden you start realizing that all those things that you're doing along the way, the blogging for Forbes, the Snapchat, Instagram stories, the sharing of your content, the delivering of value, all of these things kind of add up along the way. And so I try to reverse engineer all of these to kind of understand the value of everything we do. And then last but not least, one of the things that's really difficult to wrap your head around in the speaking industry especially is that I don't believe anybody is a competitor of mine. I truly don't believe that, there might be lots of people that are talking about digital change and lots of people that are talking about, digital marketing and the millennial mindset and even live video, all of these things that I talk about on stage. But I firmly believe that people hire me for my stories, for my background, for my ability to convey that message on stage in an entertaining way, in a motivational way, in an inspirational way. And the weird part is that you'll have many speakers that will be jealous of other speakers. You'll have many people that will say, that event is ridiculous for not hiring me. Why did they hire that person? Or one of the things for me that I've always struggled with is I don't have a book. So there's a lot of events that really only hire people that have books because they want to give something to the sponsors or give something to the CEO and say, hey, these are people we hired and here's the book that person wrote, right? Something tangible. And I used to be like, man, I can't believe they used the book as a requirement. The funny thing about that is, if that's a requirement and it's something that I haven't created, that's on me. Like, that's something that I have to realize, that it's a limitation in my growth, right? And I'm going to be releasing my first book in the fall. And a lot of that is because I've realized that's going to open up more doors for me as a speaker. It's going to allow me to grow my brand, my authority, and ultimately it's going to increase the amount of money people are willing to pay for me as a speaker. And so, I want to wrap up this episode and kind of bring all of this together and saying that, I love being a professional speaker. I love it's amazing that I get paid to go on stage and talk about all of these things. And it's much more than just talking about it, right? There's a lot of great, instructors out there. There's, Grant Baldwin. He hosts a podcast called The Speaker Lab. And I was on that podcast recently. It's actually one of the FOMO Fans episodes. I will put it in the show notes. And then Amy and Michael Port have a speaker event that they put on to train speakers to really hone the craft of speaking, to understand how you should stand and how to use your pausing as a value, and how to emphasize certain words, and when you should walk forward versus walking backwards, and how you should hold your hands versus not hold your hands. There's all of these people that are doing amazing things, and I recommend, if you really want to get into this arena, you truly, truly need to invest in understanding all of the things that go into being a great speaker. But here's the other part of that. Just because someone else did it a certain way, just because there's a certain path to success, does not mean you can't craft your own path. But it does mean that to craft your own path, you have to be willing and okay to not get this gig. Or, one of the things that was the hardest for me when I was moving and my speaking fees from $4,000 to $10,000 per speaking fee, one of the hardest things for me was I negotiated down. Even though I started at 10, I negotiated down fairly easily. And then I realized the only way that this was going to happen was I had to be willing to say no, and I had to be willing to not negotiate. And the scary part of that is the only way you can make that happen is if you're going to be okay not speaking at that event this year. And to me, that was really hard because I wanted to speak there. I wanted to speak there so badly, but I also wanted to make sure that I was able to provide, food for my family and able to get the value that I believed I was deserved. And so one of the hardest things for me over the last 12 months was being able to say, I'm sorry that you don't have the budget for me. I hope next year we're able to work out something a little bit earlier. And ultimately, good luck at your event. And there was a lot of events that I said, you have to pay me this amount or I can't do it. And they said, okay, I'm sorry, we can't make that happen. And although that hurt me a little bit, and I really wanted to speak there, by doing that, all of a sudden, the value and the conveyed value started to increase. But I also am working myself towards a goal, right? My goal has always been that I want to be a speaker that does the work it's myself, but also when I am speaking, I'm able to be a little bit more selective on where I speak, when I speak, what topics I speak about. And so I know for me personally, my goals are probably different than yours. If you work for a brand or you're a startup and you want to get your startup noticed, maybe it's, hey, speak at as many events as you possibly can so that you just get your name out there and word of mouth, or maybe strategically line yourself up to speak at South by Southwest and start to ask people, hey, how did you speak at South by Southwest? Because that's another secret, and I'll end this episode on this. The thing about becoming, in the speaker industry, for me, almost all of my speaking gigs come from a relationship with people. Not what they found me on a website. Yes, they might search my name, but more often than not, it's someone in my community that goes to bat for me. Someone that listens to my podcast goes to their boss and says, we have to have this person at the event. Or someone that was sitting in one of my presentations and goes back to their office and puts my YouTube video on the projector screen in their team meeting and is like, wow, this guy has so much value. It's amazing the power of relationships between fellow speakers, between event organizers, between sponsors. And so I want to leave you with this. I think understanding the speaking life and understanding where things are going, how they're going, it's a lot of work and there's no easy button. And I can tell you, I was blessed to have a ton of inbound speaking where people were asking me to speak. Over the last 6 months, I've had to be more aggressive on my outbound, applying to speaking and reaching out and asking brands. And that's been hard for me. That's been something I've struggled with. But it's because I've learned that I didn't do some things along the way that I shared with you guys here on this episode. So I wish all of you amazing luck. And remember that we each have a different journey. We each have a different reason for becoming a speaker. The value you provide as a speaker will be different. But I think we have to kind of own that and start to understand projected value, start to understand the relationship and what you want to get out of something. And, for me, I never want to be the person that speaks about something that I can't actually do myself or I'm not doing in my day-to-day life. But I also want to be someone that I love speaking. If I could look out and say 5 years from now, I could host an event like Tony Robbins hosts, where he does 12 hours in one day on one stage, I would do that in a heartbeat because I get my energy from the audience. I love being on stage. I've been blessed that I never get nervous before a speaking gig. I really do love what I'm doing. And that's my goal. That's where I set my sights on. And I think each speaker, each event, each person has to look at that differently. And I see some of my good friends. I see Greg Walker has jumped in here. Ooh, I see Chris Schiffler. What's up, Chris? And Tim. Carlos Gill is in here as well. Jeff Adams. I see my good buddy Joey Coleman is here watching. Joey's one of my favorite keynote speakers in all the land. He was the closing keynote speaker at Social Media Marketing World this year, and truly is one of the guys that I look at as doing it the right way and just being an amazing facilitator of content as well as inspiration. But I truly hope this episode adds value to what you're doing, so that you understand this industry, understand my journey, understand what you can do to kind of get across on your journey. And feel free to leave me questions on the live broadcast. Tweet at me at iSocialFans, things that you have. I'm going to probably do a follow-up to this episode with answering some of your questions about the speaking industry, because it's one of the things that a lot of people ask me is I have a list of about 13 things that people want me to answer, and I wanted to set the stage first by sharing this part, and then I'm going to go back and do a separate episode and answer some of those questions. So thank you guys so much for listening. Remember, this episode is sponsored by 9 Spokes. If you go to FOMOfans.live or 9spokes.fomofans.live. Sign up, hit the join free, and sign up for their small business dashboard, giving you all your data in one location. I truly am thankful for their partnership and them sponsoring FOMO Fans so that I can bring you this show every single week on every single player across all of the different podcasting apps, as well as broadcasting live here on Facebook Live, Periscope, and YouTube. For Brian Fanzo, for episode 39, that is a wrap. I will be back in a second for my 5-minute clip exclusive for you guys only on the podcast. I'm going to give you a little bit of rant about what I believe must change in the event professional space to truly get a diversity of speakers. Start getting more younger people on stage, more females, more different ethnicities, and ultimately bring some of these events to new arenas and new places. Stay tuned for that. If you're listening on the live stream, you have to download the podcast. I'm evoking a little bit of that FOMO. Cheers, my friends. Make it a great day.